Hotep, I'm Dr. Gloria Lattimore Pease, host and producer of OmniU Presents the H3O Art of Life show. And the title of this show is The Future of Community / Community Activists. Because the premise for that is that I'm thinking that if we don't have community activists, we're not going to have community. So they're just so inextricably bound to each other that we may as well not try to discuss them as though they are separate things, that you can have a community and people can sit inside their houses and watch television and never get involved in any of the issues that the community has to engage. So in order to have that conversation, I thought I should have community activists. Who else? And I decided that I should. Every time I look on television, you are the face of community activism, Reverend Paul Jakes, and I'm so happy to have you on my show.
I am so glad to be on here with my mentor, my leader, Attorney Lawrence Kennon.
Yes.
I mean, this is just a real pleasure and an honor for me to be here, and it's a pleasure to meet you, and thank you for the compliment.
Thank you, and of course, you know, Lawrence E. Kennon and I go back way too far. We just go back forever and a day, early on the West Side when we were both actively engaged in independent politics and all the things all the issues that affected our community, we were involved in them. And I don't know who told us, where we got the impetus, why we thought that we were supposed to come out of our houses and get off our couches and go out and get involved in the things that were going on, not just in Chicago, but, you know, we were very excited about the Montgomery bus boycott. You know, we loved to see our people taking matters into their own hands and resolving long-standing injustice. So I guess we just have that in our DNA. So tell me, first of all, Lawrence Kennon, I'm going to let you talk a lot, but I had to first get here and find out how he got to be who he is. You got to say something, though.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
In keeping with your introduction about we can't just sit there and watch, you know, there was a saying during the movement that the revolution will not be televised.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
All right. Opening statement. I'm coming back to you. You know, you're going to have a lot to say. But I have to find out about Reverend Paul Jakes, Jr. I do know that you told me that you inherited your church from your father. So you were brought up in a certain kind of way. So talk about that for a minute.
Well, it's wonderful that one can have a foundation and legacy. And my father certainly was a Baptist pastor who was certainly involved with the Black Strategy Center, involved with the Southern Christian Leadership Movement, and my mom and dad brought me to hear Dr. Martin Luther King over at Stone Temple years ago, and Dr. King came over and touched my hand, and, you know, as a young man, that was quite moving. And I think in a way he kind of passed something on to me to continue to stand and to continue to be a light for our people. And one of the things I've learned is from just listening to different theologians like Karl Barth and others, that preachers need to have a Bible in one hand and a newspaper in the other. And both go together as you minister to the needs of people in the country, because people need real practical preaching. People like Dr. Jeremiah Wright, he was my professor as well, and he taught us how to blend it. And that really makes a difference. People like Dr. John Kwame Porter, who also taught us theology, and others. And so it makes a difference when you have those type of teachers, and it really gives you a great perspective of what ministry really is today.
I have to just ask your mentor over here, how is it that he was a young man at Stone Temple hearing Dr. Martin Luther King when we were young people, and he's a whole lot younger than we are. So it seems to me that he was a toddler.
That's right.
Holding on to somebody's hand at the Stone Temple, because we were there.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. So, and then of course John Porter was my colleague.
Oh, really?
Yeah, at the Center for Inner City Studies of Northeastern Illinois University.
I see.
So I know whose DNA is flowing through your veins.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Now tell me how you became his mentor, Attorney Kennon.
That's a long story. No, it isn't. It's a direct story.
Okay.
His grandmother and my mother were friends.
Okay.
I've known him long before he was born.
Okay.
His uncle and I were best friends. We were neighbors back in the 40s. And his mother was the best friend of my sister. So we know him when he was a small child, and he knows our family, and we keep very close. After his father died, my family goes over to his grandmother's, who's really living with his aunt, and we go over every New Year's and have a time together. So we've kept it going for the last 60, 70 years.
But that doesn't explain mentorship. How does he then learn to look up to you? Just because you are associates and because your families,
No, so that he knew who I was already. And I've been out and, like you mentioned, a few times on television and on the different agencies and organizations. So when he came along, he was involved with that, and he was involved with the movement. And I was involved with the movement. So he knew like Push, Thomas Todd, Gus Savage, and all of those same people who we know, he knew as a very young person. So he has that straight line through, and he has continued it beyond what many of his peers are doing. So he has the sense of justice that permeated really the community, our environment that we fought for.
All right, so you all have done some work together, I take it.
Absolutely.
What work have you done, Reverend Jakes?
Well, I think probably some of the outstanding work that Attorney Kennon and also Standish Willis and others have been involved in have been some cases such as the Jeremiah Meredith case, the case with LaTanya Haggerty, the Robert Russ case, cases with the young police officer Eric Holder that was beaten by his colleagues. There's just been a cadre of different issues that have been high profile, and they have stood tall not only in the street but in the courtroom. And I've seen them operate at a high level, and it's just been a real team effort just to see attorneys, and I have to pay tribute to people like Judge Pincham and Attorney Kennon. They all stood tall in the courtroom. Tom Todd and Jim Montgomery and Johnny Cochran, all of them. It was a dream team of attorneys that were just awesome. Lou Myers, others, just did what they had to do, and we did what we had to do in the street, and so many victories came from it. And it's a part of, I think, as he said, the DNA. It bleeds into you, and before you know it, you're standing for another generation of people that just need to have a voice crying in the wilderness.
Well, you have been very fortunate to have been among the names. You're not name dropping. These are people that you have known, that you have met, who you have seen operate, men of integrity, people who have taken great risks, because over time, these things are all risky. They're risky business. We know some people that got put out of business for taking such risks. When Paul Robeson took a stand, you know, they destroyed his career and ultimately destroyed him. So you always know that as an activist, when you're taking a stand and when you don't let up and when you're not bought off, that you are always in some taking some degree of risk. So what keeps you going? What keeps you, is it naivete? You don't know how dangerous it is? Or is it that your conscience won't let you not take a stand?
Well, you know, I'm glad that my uncle, which Attorney Kennon mentioned years ago, he got me a book before he passed on called Roots. And that book really said a whole lot to me, and it mentioned how we need to stand, and there are times that we speak and sometimes we don't speak, and sometimes you just have to use wisdom in order to survive, and so I found that to be the case even when I went to seminary in Virginia, and I had a situation where I was working for a fairground, and I saw a white manager hit a black man with a chair. Disturbed me very much. I was working. I was 1,000 miles away from home. I was trying to figure out, you know, what do I do? The black man came back with a white police officer who was spitting tobacco, and he said, "Any of y'all boys seen what happened here?" And he said, "Hey, you boy up there on that truck, have you seen what happened?" Well, I looked at him and realized that if he calling me a boy, he ain't no better than the other guy that hit you know. So I waited until I got off the ground and went to the NAACP and then lodged a complaint, and they certainly dealt with that fairground completely. It became one of the big stories there in Virginia. But it took listening, but it kind of hurt me that I couldn't do something right then and there. And I said, Lord, I want to be able to help people if I can right then and right there. And so in the background of Paul Jakes, that really ignited me that when I had a chance to do, that I would do, and I would help those that I could help. Naturally, my foundation in the church has been a strength as well, but that was one of the issues that really pushed me forward, and I thank you for asking that question.
Well, T.R.T.H. Cheatwood, who is a renowned African author, says that it's not enough to be right, you have to be intelligent and right. Which means that, you know, you have to pick your battles. You have to know how to fight. You know, you can wade in and create more of a problem than there is already, because you can get the other person, you know, injured even further, and yourself as well, and not really do what it is you want to do. And what you wanted to do was right or wrong. And what we always want to do is to remove injustice, or to challenge injustice, or to transcend it, or resolve it, but to do something about it. And sometimes if you get distracted, if you get led off in the direction of the little fight, then you lose the war. So you have to choose, and I know that's important, but even when you choose, and if you choose wisely, and you're right, and you're intelligent about how you fight, and whom you fight, and for what you fight. Because not everything, fighting about somebody calling you a name may not necessarily be a fight that you need to have, because there's something underlying that. But I've known Larry to fight some awesome fights, and have cases that you really wouldn't expect him to win, or expect the group of attorneys associated with him to win the Rainbow Beach thing, for example. You want to talk about that?
Yes, with the Rainbow Beach, I was and I wasn't a lawyer. I was an activist in that because I was the adult advisor of the NAACP Youth Council.
Okay.
And this was in 1959. I had gotten out of the Army in 1956, joined the NAACP. My sister was already the secretary when I got out. And after maybe less than 2 years, we with another person named William Henry, other than the politician that we know, we formed the West Side NAACP Youth Council. And at that time there was an atmosphere. This is in the turn of the 60s, into the 60s. The South had the sit-ins already and the marches and so forth. The buses had gone down. So the spirit had kind of permeated the country. And our kids were being taught to watch that. You were saying it's more than local. So we were doing our local thing, but we also did like picketing the Walgreens as a sympathetic picket because they weren't letting blacks eat at their counters. And so we had formed a group of young people who were conscious, race conscious. Rainbow Beach in the 60s, in the 50s was not open to black people. Most of the people in the heart of the South Side were unaware that it existed, including myself. And I didn't know it existed until a Jewish woman went to the NAACP saying that she was out at Rainbow Beach and saw a black couple attacked by some white people. And she wanted us to do something about it. What our answer was, what is Rainbow Beach? But anyway, I was in the state's attorney's office at that time. And we decided that after conferences and so forth with the executive director, who was Mr. Fuqua at that point, and the NAACP is not normally, at that time, an activist group. They wanted to do things in the court. But we insisted that we needed to go out there. So we went out to Rainbow Beach with the cooperation of the police department, because I happened to know the captains and all this, being in the state's attorney's office. At that time, I'd been in the office for 4 years or so. And we went out to the beach, and it was all white. It was the Sunday before Labor Day. And when we got out there, it was thousands of people out there. But the police had accordion to let us in. We got in and we stayed a certain number of hours, and then we got out. When we came out, they threw rocks at us and so forth. But we went back every Saturday morning for 2 years, and till finally it got to a point. Let me step back. We went back out for every Saturday morning with the police for 2 years. But it got to a point where we didn't need the police. We could go out there alone, because other people were going out there other than on Saturdays. And some of them had conflicts, but as a result of our persistence, more blacks came, fewer whites came, and as the traditional turnover occurred, and we were able to open Rainbow Beach.
So even though you were in the state's attorney's office, you were not in a legal posture here. You were in your social, civic posture.
Let me tell you, when we went out there, some of the girls had to go to the ladies' room. I walked up to the back area where the ladies' room were. The police were there, and they were not in uniform that first day. So they had their summer shirts down over their belts, and they had their guns underneath that. And so some were mingling, and some were around the perimeters watching. When I went up there to take the girls, the guys hit each other. It's the state's attorney. And so the word got around real quick. So they then began to think that that was a state's attorney's situation. And so they all then made sure that they were protecting us much more than they had. And some of the whites came up and got one of those big drums and were saying boom, 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 go back to Africa. And then they were saying Lumumba, Lumumba. So this was the time of Patrice Lumumba. the cops came up. They said, "Mr. Kennon, I think you better go because this is getting out of hand. You know, we don't want you to be hurt." And I said, "No," because they wanted me to leave before the girls came out of the washroom. I said, "Oh no, we're gonna go." I said, "I'm relying on you guys, you know." And so we took the girls back, but it was a help that they recognized that there were some some officials there.
Right. And see, that kind of segues right into what I'm thinking now about Reverend Jakes. Your position as senior pastor of your church lends a voice. It gives the community a louder, more authoritative voice than it would have if I'm just Miss Brown coming out on my porch, because you have a constituency, and so that carries some weight, and it's a good thing you're on our side, because I would shudder to think what would be happening if you were against us, because you're in a position to influence people and to get people to support or not withdraw support in many ways. Do you ever have any are you ever at odds with your congregation over issues that you want to engage?
You know, I'm very fortunate that my father was the pastor before me and was a movement pastor, and to that record of Reverend Paul Jakes Sr., the first church on the west side to open its doors to independent candidates such as Danny Davis and Ed Smith, who were running as independent candidates, my dad opened the door for that. My dad allowed ministers like Reverend Clarence Lumumba James to join our congregation, who was a part of the movement, who was one of Dr. King's disciples, young disciples, and even Dr. Kwame Porter joined our church with his family years ago. So it was already a movement church in the 60s. They had opened that ministry, and so I was exposed to a lot of people that were the Lacey Banks and others who would come and speak. And so it was like taking a baton and then just running continuously. And since then, we've had people like Gus Savage to speak, Dr. Jeremiah Wright, Minister Louis Farrakhan, Reverend Al Sharpton, Attorney Kennon, just to mention so many, Judge Pencham and others that have educated our congregation. So they've become very astute and very aware of the type of church that we are and the type of ministry that we have seen it develop to be. And so, yes, I've had some members to say, you don't need to get involved in that. That attorney is pushing you too hard. But I would say this is an important ministry. If someone doesn't speak up on issues such as the Sacred Heart Hospital and people getting proper health care and people not being ripped off and operated on unnecessarily, then who's going to say something, especially when our members are in those hospitals and being operated on unnecessarily. Someone has to say something. The schools and the shootings that are going on. I think that's probably what my first ministry outside of the doors was, actually running over to Westinghouse High School when the principal said to me, Reverend, 4 students just got shot on the front steps of the school. Can you come over now and help us to drag the students in and help us with the chaos there? And I found myself leaving from behind the pulpit and my desk in my office and going over to the school. And that's how we adopted Westinghouse. That's how we adopted Morton and Morris School and Biola, and wound up standing up for schools that got a pink slip that they had to be closed. And so it's been just that cadence continuously that has brought us out. And I have, the church has suffered some. We have suffered, with some personal things. But even with the doors being closed, I've seen God open the doors in other areas. I would have never met Dr. Gloria Peace if I hadn't stood up to do what is right, and I'm honored to just be able to share some of
I'm honored
this.
for you to say that, but my vision of a church is what I knew as a youngster. I knew that a church was an omni institution. It was not supposed to be a closed institution, and you went inside the building and the doors of the church closed and you operated entirely within that. I never could understand how people could drive into a community, fill up the whole community, all the neighborhood streets with their automobiles, go in and worship, and come out and leave the community worse off than they found it, because the community had problems and nobody in the church was addressing the problems in the community where the church is standing. How do you get to do that? How do you think that you're supposed to be there? So you see yourself as a citizen of your community. You see your church as a part of that same community, and what affects that community affects you.
Absolutely. There's so many stories that I could tell you about the importance of the church being active. Our mission and our theme at the church is the church in mission is love in action.
Okay.
And so we believe that this is what carries us, and certainly we might not get the crown down here, but we'll get a crown if we faint not. So we're continuing to just pursue helping people. Just the last couple of Saturdays, we've been doing ministry and feeding. A couple of Saturdays ago, we gave out 100 bags of potatoes, white potatoes, and people came from everywhere, and we networked. Then this Saturday, we had breakfast for the community, and we networked. And so now we're getting ready to do some other things on a few other Saturdays as it relates to school closings and things such as that, and letting people who are activists stay over at the church as they strategize even overnight to work toward actually making things better for the community.
Well, that's so commendable, because I had Karen Lewis, who is the president of Chicago Teachers Union, as you know, on my show. And we had a very lively conversation, but I realized, and I'm sure she realized, that her role is the president of Chicago Teachers Union, which is not the same as the parent of a child about to be ushered out of the neighborhood to another school. Not the same as a resident of the community who is about to be sitting next door to an abandoned building which can be occupied by any number of things, from rodents to antisocial youth. So the whole idea is that I mainly saw you as the face on the community's response to the school closing, because I knew that certain kinds of information Karen Lewis had and was eager to share, but I also knew that she was not affected in the same way. That
Exactly.
Parents and children and residents and ministers and business people in the community are affected by these proposals.
Yes, I'd like to think that I represent the children and the parents, those that are being pushed around left and right, and they need to have a voice. They need to have someone to voice concerns, and so many of our young people have been killed in the street. Last year, the number is, I think,
518
yeah, it's
killed.
It's such a terrible thing, and there's a great sense of hopelessness, and people turning on each other because they don't see actually a way out. I think that they need to know that there's a way out, and I think activism, I think certainly speaking up, calling for the city councilman, the mayor, to respond responsibly to their responsibility. I don't believe that we can just stand still and use bottles on each other when we can actually use the shoes that we have to speak power to those that are in positions. And so that's the reason we constantly call upon, take for instance the hospital situation, we call for the Illinois Department of Public Health to give accountability to the community with what happened at Sacred Heart Hospital. We called on our congressman to come both with them and to tell us what's going on at the hospital. The same thing with the teachers union. We had Karen Lewis to come to church, tell us what's going on with the teachers. We needed to know what's going on, and the same we call on the city and the city council to respond responsibly. There's no way that we can just give them a pass on any level. We do understand the struggles of the teachers, and but we certainly have voiced publicly, both to President Obama and Rahm Emanuel, that we love you, Mr. President, but we love our children even more. Give us resources that can help our children, and that is no indictment of our concern of having the first African American president. But we need to have some resources here that makes a difference and help our people to be able to rise and to live and not to die. And that's what we're calling for during this season.
And I think that, when you start thinking about the schools, I agree that the schools are not, many of those schools are too large and they're not in good condition, so they need to be removed and new schools need to be built. We have long since needed to have new facilities, fresh new facilities, modern facilities to house our children. We can build all kinds of other things with city money, but we don't seem to know that the children are deserving of everything that we can give them that fosters their growth. Because if on the other end of this, if you have citizens who are enamored of the city in which they live and who want to, as you two do, make it a better place, then certainly you have to start out by influencing young people at a very early age. You don't alienate them. You don't treat them as though they are not important or they're worthless. And you destabilize their development so that they don't know from one day to the next where they're going to be, where they're going to go to school, who the teacher's going to be. They can't count on anything because they can see the impotence that surrounds them. Nobody can seem to do anything about this. My mother and father can't do anything about it. I'm little. I can't do anything about it. Nobody can do anything about this, and people just run over us. They just do what they want to do. So it breeds anger and hostility and antisocial sentiments and behavior. And we certainly don't need to do that. We need to treat our children as in love and action. In a way that assures them that we love them and we want for them what is the best that we can offer.
It's such a complex situation, though. There's so many different aspects to this. we're saying we need to have new schools, but we're closing down schools before new schools are built.
I'm
So-
saying tear down old schools and put new schools in their places, because some of these buildings, what they're saying is that some of these buildings don't have air conditioning and they don't have this and that, you know, and they're too large and they're too costly to maintain, and you don't have the population. And I'm saying, fine, take them down, put up the right school. Don't
So am I.
move the children, move the building. Change the building. Modify the building.
And
Rebuild the building.
Mhm.
But don't make the children carry that way. Don't put that onus on the children, that they have to compensate for modifications that the system needs to make. You can make modifications on property with a lot less damage than you can if you make those modifications on the people. And that's what I'm saying. I'm saying, listen, you were there when we had Willis wagons. You were there when the playground was filled with these mobile units because they did not want to change the boundary, which was a line on a piece of paper, so that children could go to schools that were underpopulated. There were underpopulated schools then. But our children couldn't go to them. They had to be in overcrowded schools on double shifts with no place to play on the playground because mobile units were covering the playground. They do whatever they need to do in order to maintain the status quo. And that is what this is now. They're maintaining the status quo, which is keeping their upper hand over us. And I'm saying that we can look at this another way. We can say, okay, the schools need improving. Improve the schools. Don't march the children miles away from home. You used to say they had to go to the neighborhood schools. Do you remember when the neighborhood schools policy was the official policy of the Chicago public schools? Mm-hmm. And the children couldn't go to the school outside their neighborhoods? And parents sometimes told lies and got addresses of relatives that lived in other, quote, better neighborhoods so their children could go to other, quote, better schools. So the neighborhood schools policy is a long-standing tradition in the city of Chicago. Why change it now? Why have the children marching over to other places when you can satisfy the needs for schooling in the community where the children live? That's my argument.
We've seen a lot of ugly things happening. First of all, when they knocked down the housing developments and moved a lot of both our members and other members of other churches to places like Danville, St. Paul, Minnesota, and other places, or just scattered them out, we lost a lot. Mm-hmm. We lost voting power. Mm-hmm. We lost a lot of people, mm-hmm. and it really put us in a bad way. But politically, I think that Daley too knew what he was doing, mm-hmm. and certainly Daley 3 Rahm Emanuel, I'm sure he knows it as well. And so there's a lot of movement going on for power, mm-hmm. and position that would keep them in power, because they knew that if we have the population, then we have the vote, mm-hmm. and then we could put people like a Harold Washington back into place. So we're looking at that. They're mm-hmm. manipulating that. But mm-hmm. then our young people will have to cross over certain territories, certain gang lines, unfortunately, mm-hmm. that would put the young people's lives at jeopardy, and they are fearful. Many of them mm-hmm. are. Meanwhile, they then take other dollars and throw them into charter schools, and these charter schools often throw young people out so quickly mm-hmm. that
they don't have to take every child.
Yes.
Their admission policies, they're businesses, and they don't have
and those
to take
policies
every
are
child.
written by attorneys, And that's the reason that we need more attorneys like Attorney Lawrence Kennon that are coming up with the new generation to fight back because we've got to fight a lot of these policies that allow them to push young people out. I was standing with a young man the other day and his parents. They were getting ready to push this young man out, saying that he was a part of a gang. He's not a part of a gang. He's a church fella. He got to fighting with his cousin because they were both grieved. Their grandmother had died, and they didn't know what to do. They didn't have the wraparound services that were supporting them with counseling. How do you deal with frustration and tension and strain? So we're looking at a whole collage of different things. But fortunately, that young man is still in school, and he's doing much better, and his cousin as well. We have to rise politically. We're going to have to look at what we can to do what we can and not to give in. We're going to have to watch what goes on in the city council, and we're going to have to do what we can during this season in order to look out for the betterment of our community. We can't let our children walk into other territories and die. I think if Rahm Emanuel does that, the blood certainly is on his hands. I think that we have to speak out and call it like it really is, and we've got to do what we can in order to save lives.
Let me get back into this.
Get into this.
What I was saying about the complexity,
Mm-hmm.
we were saying the same thing. I think you apparently misread what I was saying or getting into. There should not be the closing of all of these schools.
Mm-hmm.
There should, if they're going to change the schools,
Mm-hmm.
you need to change the schools before you get the children out. There should not be a situation where when all the other countries are trying to increase their schools, the number of schools and the facilities for teaching, we're closing down schools.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a local area situation.
Mm-hmm.
It's universal throughout the country.
Mm-hmm.
They're closing down schools in black communities.
Mm-hmm.
In addition to that, they're buying up the black media. So where we used to have black stations, those
Mhm.
stations are being closed.
Mm-hmm.
Our newspapers are being closed down.
Mm-hmm.
Every area where there is communication
Mm-hmm.
is being...
Where there's community.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
but communication within that community
Mm-hmm.
so that the concept of what is going on,
Mm-hmm.
the knowledge of what is happening to us is
Mhm.
not controlled by our own community.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing we have here is WVON,
Mm-hmm.
really, to tell us where we
And that's
are.
a clear station.
Yes,
So it's not black owned.
yes it is.
It is black
It's
owned.
absolutely black
Okay,
owned.
well, where does clear come in then?
Because they purchased it, the time through Clear Channel, which controls all of those channels, but it's an independent outlet.
Okay.
So it is completely controlled by the black community,
Okay.
by, what's her name?
Melody?
Melody Span.
Okay.
So, and all of the stock, all of the ownership and everything else is there.
Okay.
They bought the facility so that they have almost like a mortgage, a certain money they have to
Mhm.
pay.
Mm-hmm.
But as long as they're paying it, it's theirs.
Right. Right.
My point is, there seems to be a breakdown of all of the self-determination that you get, first of all, through education, because the schools are out,
Mm-hmm.
through the media to talk about what is going on and to communicate with each other so that we can have that unity of purpose, unity of power.
Mm-hmm.
This country has is under the auspices of the concept of white supremacy.
Mm-hmm.
And white supremacy requires white dominance.
Mm-hmm.
And so the effort is to dominate whatever is going on.
Mm-hmm.
We have the police department, which is the military arm of that domination.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the many things that the Reverend and I have been involved in with is fighting police brutality. That main case he mentioned, the Maraday case, was a case that was unjustifiably, where a person was unjustifiably beaten. And I've worked with the police department, which has not changed from the time I got out of law school 50 years ago. They are still beating black people. So there's still a fear of walking out into our own community. He gave a story, a little anecdote about whether or not they knew Reverend Jakes. The problem with our police department, for instance, is that they will find out who are the bad guys. They know the names of all the guys. They don't know any of the good guys. You ask them, do you know the name of the top minister here? No, they don't. So what they're doing is saying, let's concentrate on these bad guys, let's get them. And then if they look at one of the ministers or anybody else, they don't know. They figure he's maybe one of those bad guys that they haven't met yet in the gangs. When you hear about every killing, there's been hundreds and hundreds of killings. The police have probably, I don't know of any that they have solved, any of the drive-bys, any of those shootings. Every case says that no one is in custody as a result of this. So that the children recognize this fear, and there is an overall fear in our community. When the education is being dropped down more and more, they're closing the schools, then the thought comes in, what is our value if they're taking away our schools? The idea of actually closing a school is something we would never have dreamed of. When you think of the parallel and almost the dichotomy, because when we were young, we were fighting to open schools. Now we're fighting to prevent them from being closed. But it's still the school issue. That hasn't changed. The police issue, the brutality issue, hasn't changed. All of the Commander Burge and all of that went through all these years.
The Burge effect still lives.
The effect still lives. That's the point. It was there before Burge. It remains right now. And when you look at the news, you see everywhere that there's that, still the police brutality, there's that disrespect. Closing down our schools is disrespect. Beating us up when we walk out their door is disrespect. Taking away our communication is disrespect. So now you figure comes the revolution, which will not be televised. Comes the revolution, what do we have and where is our brain power? There's a brain drain. And when I say there's a complexity there, because unfortunately we teach our children, you got to go to your school so you can get out of this community, taking the brains out of the community. We want you to go somewhere else. So then what is left? There's a church here still living here, but surrounding that church now, all the young bright ones, they're saying, get out of here. So then you don't have that, that intellectual power. And if you can close a school, there's an anti-intellectual environment. We have this, and when you recognize we've got a 60% dropout rate in some places, 40% of the people are graduating just from high school. And you figure just because they didn't drop out, some of them, doesn't mean that they can read and write, but they just go on and graduate. And out of that, maybe 10% go to college. And if you listen to Philip Jackson, who's one of my favorite people with the Black Star program, and who's following education, he's given the statistic that 50% of the young black males drop out, flunk out the first year. So then that means that out of that 10% and 50% have dropped out, you got maybe 1 or 2 or 3% of the people who start out in high school who are finishing college. I hear this talk about we've got more black people in college now than we've ever had. I had mathematics in high school and college. I don't see how, if you got a 50 or 60% dropout rate and then 50% dropout rate after the first year in college, how do you have more people in college now than ever before? We didn't have a 30% to 40% pass rate when we were in school. And we could all read, I'm sure you know. So,
I think that if I'm correct, the statistics were dealing with how many black male were in college as it relates to how many are in prison.
Yeah.
And and some have said that has become almost an equal situation.
They're saying it's even more in prison.
Yeah, I understand the new statistics say that they're
Yeah.
more in prison now, but it used to be more blacks.
Well, Philip Jackson was among the people who conducted a recent conference called Saving the African American Child. And the whole mood of the conference, the whole theme of the conference was that our children are not being educated in the schools. And, the keynote speaker was Dr. Donald Smith, who was the founder of the Center for Inner City Studies, talked about the number of educators, Dr. Barbara Sizemore, Asa Hilliard, the number of educators who had contributed to curriculum modifications that would enable our children to be properly educated, which were never put in use, which were in fact obstructed and rejected, so that you have children in a situation where you don't have what should be there to gain their interests and their cooperation, because teaching and learning go together. You cannot teach someone who does not
Wish to learn.
And you particularly cannot teach someone that you don't respect or like, because children learn from the people they love or they like, and they will just refuse you. They will just, as the children used to use the term, space. They would just space on you because they know that you don't care for them, and they don't care to please you, and they don't care really to relate to you. It's very difficult then when you think about the teacher training institutions that train teachers to teach children who are not going to be sitting at those desks. They learn to teach virtual children, and then they come and find real children whom they don't like or respect. And they are usually inexperienced if they're in, quote, inner city schools. So you don't have see, I know the situation you went to school in. I had seasoned black teachers, and I think it makes a lot of difference. We have a lot of inexperience and a lot of other things. But I just want you to know that you and I are usually on the same side. And I feel that charter schools are businesses. People with money are coming into the community, and they are buying buildings, and they are hiring salaried employees to come in and miseducate further our children. And consequently, at some point, the community will have no voice at all in how their children are being schooled, and certainly not how they're being educated.
And I am opposed to charter schools.
And I am,
Way
that's
back
what I'm
when
saying.
they started,
Okay.
way back when they started, we knew that ultimately this would lead to a wipeout
Of public
of public
education.
education. And the majority of people in our community are not charter school people. So that what happens to them then if your best and brightest go to the charter schools? And what I was saying before is that the school system is so interrelated. It isn't an isolated island by itself. It's interrelated to the police, to the communication, to the whole environment, because we live in a total environment.
The school
So that-
system is a fort. It is a fort in the community. You understand that when you came, when the indigenous people who lived here living in tents, and the people who didn't, were settlers, came in and built forts and put put people in stations with guns to make certain that what went on in the fort was isolated from what went on in the the area surrounding the fort. The school is not a part of the community, and that's the problem.
I've written
It is
I've written a
controlled.
whole paper on that very
Okay,
point.
it's
But what I'm
controlled.
saying is, it is not, even though pragmatically, today, it's not a part of it. But the theory of the
It
school
should be.
is it's an integrated thing because all of it feeds into
All
each
the
other. That's where
institutions-
the complexity is
all the
now. Because you're supposed to be able to pour out of that school into the community.
All the
and
institutions in the
into
community
school.
ought to be part of the community.
Thank you.
That's
And
what
both
we're
of you
saying.
are right. Yeah, both of you are on the same page, because I'm going to give you some interesting points. Years ago, Dr. Stanton Payne at Westinghouse called for me to come over to help. The other principals called for me to come over and help. So we were integrated into the schools. The principals would come over after work and sit on the couch at the church, and we would sit and discuss how we're going to help our students. Now, I can hardly get the principal to come out of their office to even talk to me when I walk over to the school. And that's from school to school to school. And only time that they will call on Reverend Jakes is when their names are put on the hit list in order to be closed. Then they come and they say, oh, Reverend Jakes, we need you. But where was the communication otherwise? So things have changed
Yes.
because they have structured it. So every time that I get a chance to meet with the superintendents, I met with Jean-Claude Brizard, and I told him what was the response with his principals, and he said, oh, no, Reverend, oh. And then I tell Dr. Bird what the problem, oh, no, Reverend, oh, we got to change that. But nothing changes. There's still the same cadence where we really actually were able to get into the schools. We were able to bring all types of teams to help the young people. And young people appreciated it. Parents appreciated it. But right now, they have really closed the doors, and they have not really opened the doors
They
for
have
us.
already closed the school effectively. When they have closed the community out of the school, the school's doors can remain open, but the schools are closed. And schools need to be institutions in a community ought to be an integral part of that community. The church, the school, the local stores, all of that ought to be
My point exactly.
your point exactly. Did we wind up closing? Did we wind up on the same page? Do you think?
Oh, I think
I don't think we ever were
Yeah.
apart.
Oh,
You just
okay.
misunderstood what I was saying.
I didn't misunderstand
I was
you,
saying
Lawrence.
exactly
We
the same
always-
I think
thing.
y'all were both saying the same thing. I mean, it was.
Yeah.
Lawrence and I have been